Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me Kevin Eikenberry. Kevin is the Chief Potential Officer of the Kevin Eikenberry Group, a leadership and learning company based in Indianapolis. He has spent 30 years helping organizations and leaders from over 50 countries become more effective. Global Gurus has listed him on the list of most influential thinkers on leadership for the last 3 years. His blog and podcast are among the most popular on leadership. He has authored, co authored, or contributed to over 20 books. His newest book is Flexible Leadership: Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. Welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast, Kevin.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, me too. I'm excited to have you here. I mean, 20 books.
Well, some
I
of those I just wrote a chapter in or
Yeah,
whatever,
but
but
still, I mean, I published my first one 9 years ago, and now I'm working on my second.
well, you need to pick up the pace. No,
I know.
I'm totally teasing you. I'm totally teasing you.
Oh, I feel like, there was a big lead up to this one, and so then maybe we can do more after this. We'll see.
Well, at the end of the day, it's really not about the quantity of them, right? I mean,
Mhm.
you and I could have a conversation outside of this podcast about how books help our businesses and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's about can they have an impact in the world, right?
Right.
And I've been fortunate to have co-authors on a number of them, which changes the calculus a bit for sure.
Sure.
But I believe this book that we're going to talk about today is my best work to date, and I'm super excited to have the chance to talk to you about it.
Yeah, it's good. Before we get there, do you mind if I ask, like, how has your particular role at your company shifted since you started 30 years ago?
Well, when I started, it was Kevin. It wasn't
Uh-huh.
Kevin Eikenberry Group then, but when I started, it was just me. So obviously, it was quite different than it is now with a team of folks spread out across the United States. Um, but it's a really interesting question, and I think that as time has gone on and as our business has evolved and as our team has grown, I really need to be. I need to think of myself even more and more as a leader. I mean, I certainly did before, and certainly that's the work that we do with clients. But I actually believe that as I get better at this with my team, I'm better able to help others. In fact, I think that's one of the things that sets me and us apart from some other folks that do what we do, because I'm leading every day. So if I'm with a group, I can say, listen, like, we have more in common than you might think. You've not written any books, you've not done this or that, but you know what? I'm leading a team every single day, and my team might do different work than yours, but there's more the same than different about all that.
Sure. That makes sense. So, do you mind if I ask, is there's like something that you are working on right now as a leader? Like, you've grown and you've written books and all that, but I know that we're continuously learning. What are you thinking about now, or growing in now?
Well, I'll say two things. One is I always say that after I teach a workshop, I always say, like, I get as much out of it as I think I give, because like I'm teaching things that I know to be true, but I'm holding up the lens. Am I doing them? So the first thing I would say is I'm working on all of the things that I wrote about in this new book that we're going to talk about today, and I'm trying to be more flexible. I'm trying to be more intentional. I'm working really hard to understand the context of a situation before we make a decision, take action, et cetera, et cetera. So that is all true. And I'm continuing to your earlier question, evolve my role to be less and less in operations of the business, more and more in a purely leadership. And then, of course, the content work that I do and that only I can do. So one of the things that's evolved for me over time is being clearer about the things that only I can do, where I add the most value to the organization. And while the context for me is different than it is for others who are listening, that's true for all of us. We've got to really be clear about where do we add the most value, and it's rarely in the things that we were good at before we got this role, right? So I mean, we could say that's delegation, and that is a small part of this. but it's more than that. It's about being really clear about where we add the most value and how can we support and grow others so that they can do the things that we would have done before,
Mm,
if you will.
sure. Has that transition over the years been difficult? I know that when you start to back out of the operation side of things and you start to think more strategically and be the face, in your case, of your business even more, um, what are some of the challenges that you personally have faced in that process?
Well, I think that there's what I like to call the knowing doing gap, and in the book we talk about the difference between skill set and habit set, right? So I'm fortunate in that I think I know what the right answers, best answers are, and because I'm teaching those things in a variety of ways, it holds me to a higher standard. So I think the thing that's been hardest for me is not knowing what to do or even how to do it, but maintaining the consistency around and holding myself to that standard, if you will.
Mm,
Well,
sure.
I've had members of my team introduce me and say, if you read his stuff, he's doing what he's saying. And that's, I think, the highest
Mhm.
praise I could get. No, it's not true every day. I'm confident. There's so much I can be better at. And yet, if members of my team are saying that I'm walking it like I'm talking it or teaching it, then I'm probably heading in the right direction.
Yeah, so true. And then, the collaborative process for you when you do have a co-author or you are working together with somebody, how does that piece of it work? And again, we're still in this idea of your role and leadership. So, can you tell me a little bit about how you decide when to and who to collaborate with and how you maintain, your own voice while at the same time drawing in others?
Let's go to the end for of that first. So I think that to make collaboration in that sort of way, in the way that you're talking about it, really work, we really have to have super clear expectations. Right. So if you think about me, my last 3 books were all with a guy who, uh, gets his paycheck from me, right? And I bought his company a number of years ago, so he's absolutely a thought leader in his own right. And so we've written 3 books together, actually 4 if you count one of being a second edition, The Long Distance Leader, The Long Distance Teammate, and The Long Distance Team. And so we're co-authors. I'm also his boss. Right? So we've got to get really clear about expectations of each other and roles that we're going to play. Uh, and when is the role about us doing the book and when is the role that he gets is paid by me? Like, how do we, and so we work really hard to navigate those things, to get clear about those things. I'm not saying that they were big chasms, but if we hadn't have been clear on the front end about not only the how expectations. When most people think about setting clear expectations, they think about setting how expectations. How are we going to do this? That's important. But it's also why expectations, right? Like, why are we doing this? How does this work in the case, in Wayne and I's case, books? How does that serve each of us individually? How does it serve the organization? What do we need? Knowing those things, what do we need to do to collaborate better together? And so even though that's the context of me and another guy in a book, I think all of that's true around any collaboration. And so much conversation in the last few years has been, well, we can't collaborate unless we have a whiteboard in an office, which is just silly because, Wayne and I, during the writing of those 3 books and a second edition of Long Distance Leader that just came out, like we were rarely ever together. In fact, we wrote one of them during the pandemic. Like we didn't see each other at all, except on a screen like you and I are doing right now. And so I think that collaboration we seem to think that somehow that has to be synchronous and it has to be in person. And neither of those things have to be true. Both of those things might be helpful, they might be desirable, they might be our first inclination, they might even be our first preference. But none of them are necessary in order for collaboration to happen. So, for example, an hour ago, I was in a meeting with my team, and when we were all together, our one time a year when we're all physically together last In December, we were talking about well, there was an item we were going to work on, and we were going to brainstorm together, and we ran out of time with the rest of the things we were doing. It got deprioritized, and we didn't do it. Collaboration, brainstorming. We think about that being something we do together. But today, I gave them the expectation. I gave them the task of here's the question. Here's what I want from you to do. I want you to all brainstorm individually and send me your answers. I have very clear expectation about why we're doing it, what we're doing it, how I want them to deliver it to me, when I want them to deliver it to me. And I will collect all those asynchronously and then we will collaborate on it after that. So it's just a different way. It doesn't mean we can't do it. Right. So all of that to the end of your question, which is about it's about the how. Right? This is about setting clear expectations, knowing what role we're all playing. How is that all going to fit together is super important
Mm.
for collaboration to be successful. And now I forgot the first part of your question, so I'm sorry.
Oh gosh, let me think. I'm thinking about a new question.
I think it was
Okay.
about how or when do I decide to collaborate? And I think it all depends on the work. What's the situation? What's the context? Who is the best? Who are the best people in my life or on our team to bring together for a certain thing? So I think uh,
Right.
I'm gonna ask myself, like, what's the situation? Who brings experience, but also who brings a perspective, right? Because sometimes you want to bring a perspective that's completely foreign to what you think are the experts for that, and all that. So it's all about thinking about the context on the front end.
Oh, that's really good. Okay. The question that I was going to ask, that came to me while you were talking was, how do you define collaboration? So I think sometimes people get confused about what collaboration actually is. So they kind of do cooperation. They're working. They think that they're collaborating, but they're kind of working together. What you're talking about sounds like the way I view collaboration. Can you define collaboration?
Well, there's a cooperative component, right?
Sure.
And there might be a synchronous component or not, as we've already talked about.
Hmm.
But to me, maybe where you're headed, I think maybe where you're headed is the idea of synergy, that
Yeah.
collaboration allows us, the old line is 1 + 1 = 3. I
Yep.
like 1 + 1 = 11, right? You get two ones, you add them together, you get 11. But in any case, that the sum of the group together is greater than the sum of the parts.
Mm.
And so I think that's what we all would aspire to in collaboration.
Mm.
And and I think if we do the kind of stuff we've just been talking about, we can influence collaboration to be much more collaborative, if you will, than
Sure.
just cooperative.
That's great. Okay. So when you work with leaders, you're working with a lot of leaders, your people are working with a lot of leaders. What do you feel like they crave right now? What does it seem like they crave right now? And how does your book kind of help meet that need?
I think one of the things that leaders are craving right now is some certainty. Uh, they feel like there's so much uncertainty. There's some measures that say that times are more uncertain now than ever. Philosophically, I don't know how we can say that because we're not living in another time. We're only living in this time. But I think that we can point to a number of things that say, hey, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? There's uncertainty about what work looks like, things like AI. There's about where work is happening, the evolving workplace in everything that's happened since COVID. There's uncertainty about the nature of how we're leading and running organizations. There's uncertainty in the business community, in our industries, in our world, in our geopolitical, like all that stuff. Like we can lay all those things out there and say, yeah, hey, there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think what an awful lot of leaders would like is like, could we just have some certainty? I'm like, I don't think we're going to be there. Like the craving is give me certainty, and I think, but what we really need is not certainty as much as knowing how to navigate things when they are uncertain, accepting the fact that uncertainty is here to stay, and then saying, okay, given that, what can I do
Mm.
to be more comfortable in it and to flex my approach to leading in it so that we can be more successful.
That makes so much sense. I think people struggle to deal with nuance, and what you're providing is a nuanced perspective on leadership. And
For sure.
and yet you're saying that while you want certainty, you're going to have to accept that it's not coming, and that instead of trying to seek out a certain way of handling the uncertainty, instead you need to meet that uncertainty with a nuanced approach to leadership. That's what I'm hearing.
And and see it for what it is. See it in a clear-minded sort of way rather than shirking away from it or just treating it with a sense of certainty, right? So, we talk in the book about the idea of understanding the context of our situation, and we use a model that was created originally by Dave Snowden called the Cynefin framework, and we've simplified it a little, but tried to obviously keep the core of what Dave and his compatriots have done with it over the years. It's been used mostly in group work or strategic work. And I'm suggesting we should be using it much more on a day-to-day basis. Like, what do we know? What do we not know? And we end up treating too many things like they're certain, even when they're not, which leads us to being this, trying to be the smartest person in the room or have the answer or give the answer. And that leads to all sorts of dominoes falling and all sorts of unintended consequences. And we've all experienced those. And by the way, there are times when things are certain. And in those times, some of those natural tendencies about how you lead might be perfectly logical and highly effective. It's just that we can't just go with what we've always done or are comfortable with alone and expect to get great results. That's at the crux of this point, is that we have to recognize that in a world that's changing, as leaders, we must also change. Because if we don't, how can we possibly expect to get great results?
Yes. So you end up talking about in your book, you talk about flexors and being able to see that there's a spectrum between how I'm used to doing things and this other approach, and then maybe I need to find the right, I guess, place along that
The
spectrum that
best
I should be
place,
leading from. What's that?
right? The best place,
The best place.
maybe not the right place, because that's part of the challenge, right? I mean, those
Great.
two words are close together, but not the same.
Love
So
it.
trying to come up with the right one is like, okay, there's a right answer. Like, what's the
Yeah.
best answer right now in this moment, knowing what I know and what I don't know, right? I've asked leaders for a long time, would you rather lead for compliance
Mm.
or for commitment? And almost every leader will raise their hand or nod their head and say, I want to lead for commitment. And yet when we look at leaders, oftentimes what we're getting or what they're getting is a lot closer to compliance, right? And I'm not saying we don't want people to comply to laws and ethics and that sort of stuff. But what I'm saying is if you're leading for compliance, what you're getting is yes, boss.
Yep.
And most every leader will say, that's not really what I want. At least not all. Sometimes, by the way, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's perfectly fine. That end of the spectrum, to your point. The other end of that flexor is commitment, engagement, ownership, whatever words you want to put there. And most of us would say, hey, we want to be there more of the time, or we want to lean that direction. But if we only and always lead for commitment, it's not always the perfect answer, just like it's not always the perfect answer to always just settle for compliance. The right answer in almost every case is somewhere between them.
Mm.
And that's where context comes in. Which direction should I be leaning now? Right? So much of leadership discussion is about here's how you should do it. And my comment always is, well, it depends. And what it depends on is the context. And that's when we open the door to say, not what have I always done or what I'm comfortable doing? What does my style tell me? What do my strengths tell me? But what's the best answer for us in this situation? Which might be different than the one 2 hours from now with a different person. It might be different from the one 3 days from now with a customer or whatever. That's the difference. It's being intentional about the context to help us then flex on these flexors in that moment. That's what flexible leadership is.
Where do you think people get stuck in, between like, okay, I see that this is a concept as a concept that I can see what you're saying, but I don't, you know, maybe they're not able to completely jump into that, or they don't understand how to do that. Like, where do people get stuck in moving towards that?
Well, they get stuck in all sorts of ways. I want to start though by saying something that you said earlier, which I really appreciated. You said that I'm talking about something that's more nuanced, which I am 100%. What I'm proposing here for all of us as leaders is not the easiest path.
That's right.
It's a harder path. There's no question about it. And it's harder in part because we have to be intentional, right? So where do people get stuck? They get stuck, and the book is laid out in three sort of phases: mindset, skill set, habit set. And they can get stuck in any one of the three places, just like we can on any sort of leadership thing, any kind of thing, and any kind of skill in general. But like the mindset thing is, do I buy what Kevin's selling? Do I get this, and do I see there's some value there, or am I stuck in, I thought I was supposed to be consistent. I thought I was this kind of leader. This is how I am. So that's how they have to get used to being with me. Like all of that stuff gets in the way. And if I'm there, it doesn't matter about the rest of it. I'm already stuck. Or I could say, yeah, I understand the idea of being flexible. I understand the reason, the fact that I need to adapt to a given situation. Like Kevin, I get that. Um, so I need the skills. And so we try in the book, and we're talking here about some of what some of those skills are, how to do it. And so then we could get stuck in not really getting it well enough, or not being willing to try it. Right. Then the third thing is, and this is where there's a lot of people getting stuck in all sorts of stuff in organizational leadership development, is there's a difference between knowing it and doing it. Right. And that's the habit set. So how do I move from, I have this beautiful new toolkit that I even really like and appreciate. How do I remember to and make sure I keep using it? That's habit set. So we can get stuck in any of those spots. So we try to acknowledge that and talk about that throughout the book.
Mm. So what, I guess I'm trying to think of, did you already answer this question? But basically my
Well,
question.
repetition is the mother of learning, right? So, like, if maybe it's fine, don't worry
Yeah,
about it.
maybe it is fine. But I guess what I'm thinking is, okay, so how does one get out of that, right? The how does one get into the right mindset, and how does one develop the right skills and habits? I mean, I obviously I'm going to the okay, so what's the next step that we need to understand?
Yeah, I think it really does have to start with mindset. Like, do people and I talk to you as a listener or a viewer. Do you buy the idea that it's okay to be flexible? Like, if you're sitting there listening or doing your jogging while you're listening, whatever you're doing, and saying, yes, but Kevin, yes, but I'm a this kind of leader, or yes, but I took this assessment and it told me these are my strengths, or yes, but I've always done it this way, or yes, whatever your yes, but is, when I talk about the word flexible, then that's where the first stopping point is, right? So we have to recognize the value of flexible. So let me give you sort of like another flexor, right? And so in the book, we talk about, like, I think it's 19 flexors, but it's really my hope that when people read this book, they start to see flexors everywhere.
Mm,
So
yeah.
let me give you an example of one, everybody. Uh, as a leader, shouldn't I be consistent? Shouldn't I be stable? Shouldn't people know what they're going to get with me as their leader? Isn't that the opposite of flexible? To which I would say, if you try to frame the world as either or, that's what would be true. And that would be hard to get past that if you're thinking, I'm either consistent or I'm flexible. But if you think about a tree, like a tree that's been around for 50 years, 80 years, a long time, you would say it's stable. You would say it's consistent. You would say it's strong. You would say it's sturdy. It's deeply rooted. And it's because of those deep roots that it is all those things, like sturdy and consistent and stable. And yet, look at any tree and you know that it has to be flexible or it can't possibly survive. And so it's not a question of consistent or flexible. It's a question of consistent and flexible.
Mm,
So the perhaps the biggest underlying point about being a flexible leader is recognizing that the world is shades of gray. These flexors are not about at the end of the spectrum, but somewhere in between. Both can be true. that we can be both rooted like a tree in our principles, in our values, in our beliefs about human behavior and human beings and all that stuff and our mission. Like we can be rooted in that, but we must be flexible in our approach, flexible in the how. And until we recognize and can live with the tension of those two things together, it's going to be very difficult for us to become more flexible as a leader.
When people are encountering a new situation and they're trying to decide, should I move towards this end or that end of the flexor spectrum? Um, what kinds of things should they be thinking about? What questions should they be asking themselves?
So, what do we already know? What's unknown? Who might have information? What might they know? What perspectives are we not considering? I've come to, and this is not in the book, I kind of wish now that it was, is that anytime you're facing a situation or someone's asking you a question and you say in your head, it depends, like what I'm going to do next, well, it depends. Someone asks your advice and you say in your head, you say, well, it depends. What does it depend on? Because those things that it depends on are giving you more context. And it's when you have that more context, when you have the lay of the land, when you have the map of the terrain, then you can make a more informed decision. This is not meant to say that we go into analysis paralysis on everything. That's not what I'm saying. Because maybe the what follows it depends is just a quick look and a quick scan, and in 3 seconds you're ready to make a more intentional take a more intentional action rather than just your natural response. Could be that. Or it could be, hey, I need to get some people together. We need to talk about this. We need to look at it. I need to think about this for an hour before I respond. I need to sleep on it, like whatever. Could be any of those things. But we call the flexible leadership approach as intention plus context plus flexor. And so it's like, not only do I intend that I know that I can, but to stop enough and to look at the context to say, what does this tell me? And going from there. And then where do I lean on the flexor? Do I need to talk a little bit more or do I need to ask a little bit more, which is a flexor, right?
Mm,
Talking and asking is a flexor. And so which direction should I lean in this moment
yeah.
based on the situation?
Something that comes to my mind when you're talking about this is the level of confidence that a leader has. And not just confidence that they're right, but confidence that they have what it takes and the resources around them and whatever to figure something out. Talk to me.
Confidence.
Mm.
And people might say, well, if things are uncertain, how can I possibly be confident? Is that one of your flexors, Kevin? And I would just say no. I would say that if you do the things we've been talking about, you have the chance to build a level of confidence. Confidence isn't about arrogance. Humility is not the opposite of confidence. I'll put it that way. If we're back to another both and, right? We can be humble and confident. So what I'm trying to do is equip people with some ideas and some approaches so that they can say, even when the situation is uncertain, if we take some of these approaches, if we think about some of these things, we can enter into that uncertainty with enough confidence that we move
Mm,
because ultimately we have to move. We have to take action. We have to do something. We have to lead. And so I'm a huge believer in the importance of confidence that, and I talk a lot about, and we write about in the book, the idea of what I call the confidence competence loop. That as we have more confidence, it helps us build our competence. And if we know we have a level of competence, it builds our confidence. So to answer your question, what I'm trying to do is give people tools and insights and perspectives such that they can say, I at least know something that will help me be more successful. And if I do that and I learn something, then the next time around, I'm even more confident.
mm,
Because if, like, I think every human knows how important confidence is in their own lives in terms of their ability to get better at something. And yet we don't always think about that when we think about that sort of like leadership development, for example. Like, are we working on the confidence of our leaders, not just giving them new skills to put in the toolkit?
right. What does it take to actually what do I need to invest What time and energy and effort do I need to invest in order to
Well, you need to
become a
buy a
flexible
book, don't
leader?
you think?
So
I mean,
obviously, it's
flexible
the book for
leadership,
the
right?
price of a book.
That's just listen, yeah, obviously, I'd love for people to buy a book
Of
and
course, yeah.
share it in their
They
and share it in
should.
their organization, with leaders in their organization, like 100%. And yeah, I know where you're headed because, uh, no book on its own is gonna change anyone's life or make them a better leader. The only thing that will help any of us is by making a decision to try something new and then actually doing it, right? So whether it's a book or a podcast or a workshop or a keynote or social media video or any of the hundreds of things that I'm doing all the time, writing a blog post, like none of those things do it. It requires the person who's the recipient, to all of you listening right now, to take action. So if anything I've said today makes sense to you, then the most important thing that you can do is take some action and do something different when you're done listening to this. The next time you're in a leadership situation, rather than just operating on autopilot, say, well, wait a minute, what might be a better way or a different way that might get me a better result with these folks in this situation at this time, with my team who is currently burnt out or whatever. Like, what's the context of the situation? And might I change the way I go about it? And ultimately, that's what will make a difference is that you leave this conversation with an answer to now what? What will I do different because of what I just heard? And the same thing is true of a book as well.
What are you hoping ultimately that people take away? That if somebody does, they pick up your book, they read the whole thing, if you could leave them with one main thing to take away, what would that be?
You try some of the ideas in this book. When you try some of the ideas in this book, you don't have to master them all. When you try some of the ideas in this book, you become closer to being the leader you were born to be. And because nothing positive happens in the world without leaders, when you come closer to being the leader you were meant to be, the world's a better place. It's why I do the work I do. It's why I wrote this book. And that's my ultimate hope is that
Mm,
this book is one other way, one other pebble I can drop in the world pond to help the world be a better place because leaders were more effective, because leaders were more confident, and that leaders ultimately were more flexible.
great. Oh, this has been such a good conversation, Kevin. Where can people find your book, find you?
Well, wherever fine books are sold, wherever you buy a book, you can go and search on the word flex on the title flexible leadership and my name, and you will find it. But what I want to do, Andrea, is give everyone who's listened to us or watched us a free gift for having done that. Like, I hope that you got something, some action you're going to take as a result of this. But let me give you one more. And that action is to go to kevineikenberry.com/gift because I want to give you a gift. Now, when you go to that page, there'll be lots of stuff about the book, where you can get it, the Amazon link, and all that stuff. In fact, you'll also see where you can uh, get a bunch of extra bonuses when you buy a bunch of books for your organization. We'd love to talk to you about any of that. But that's not the gift. The gift is access to my masterclass on building our confidence and the confidence of those around us. So I'm so glad you asked about confidence because it's so important. And so I built this masterclass a couple of years ago, and people pay us for it all the time. But because you've listened to this, you can get it for free, $79 value for free, just by going to kevineikenberry.com/gift and signing up for free. Hope you'll do that.
Oh, I love it. We'll link to all that in the show notes, by the way. What is one last piece of advice that you would want to give somebody who wants to have a voice of influence?
Influence in leadership is not about a position. It's about action. It's about stuff that we do. It's a verb. It's not a noun. And the world needs us. The world needs you to influence in positive ways so the world can be a better place. And I urge you to do that.
Mm, good word. Thank you so much for being a voice of influence for our listeners today, Kevin. Appreciate it.
With my pleasure. Thanks for having me.